Thank you so much, Jennifer, for being here. I truly appreciate you taking your time to have this interview. So, before we get into the main questions, I always like asking or giving the space for the artist to, quickly or briefly introduce themselves to the viewers, maybe people who are not familiar with your work. Can you just take your time to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hello, my name is Jennifer Wu, and I'm a visual development artist in animation, and I'm currently working on an unannounced feature at House of Cool, and I do mainly paintings, but I also am hired sometimes for character design.
Lovely. I absolutely love that. Like, I love having these interviews because I get to discover a lot of artists from these interviews, artists that I maybe wouldn't have discovered before. But when I saw your name, I was like, oh, I haven't seen her work before. And then I go to your portfolio and I'm absolutely blown away.
Oh,
I'm just
thank
like,
you.
I'm in love with all the characters, your expression, your shape language. It's like, especially your life drawing. I was just, how is this life drawing? That is absolutely stunning. So just wanted to quickly say that absolutely love your work. And I also noticed that you graduated from Sheridan Animation and you just recently graduated actually. So that's amazing that you just recently finished art school and you're already making so much like amazing work. So can you tell us a bit about your artistic journey, like how you started and your early, how did you know you wanted to become an artist? How did that progress leading to art school and graduating and finally working now in the animation industry?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, like you said, Sheridan was, I guess, for me, almost Sheridan was like almost the end of it because that was the end goal. How I discovered art was sort of I always loved drawing growing up. I'm sure as many people do, and I got really into art. I think somewhere in middle school, but I've always loved drawing. But middle school was the point where I started drawing every day because I watched a lot of anime and I had a lot of friends who also drew. And I started just drawing a lot of fan art and drawing like little gifts for my friends and drawing in class. And then this continued up until high school. And then that's when I went to a birthday party and I gave my friend a little drawing, as usual. And her dad was like, "Oh, are you going to apply to Sheridan?" And I was like, what's Sheridan? And it was really hard for me to believe that Sheridan was this like pretty well known animation school and well regarded animation school, and it was only 30 minutes away from us. So I looked into it and I decided I wasn't particularly drawn to actually animating, but just being able to draw as a career, I was kind of like sold on that idea and I begged my parents to let me pursue it. So after many like months of convincing, they finally were like, okay, you get to try once. And so um,
If I may interrupt real quickly, sorry about that, but trying once, especially for Sheridan, is like crazy because
yeah.
like I see a lot of videos online where people have to try like three times before they get into Sheridan. So I'm really excited to see how the story plays out. Just want to just that popped into my head real quick. Yeah.
Yeah, I it really took so much convincing because I'm sure like many people, my parents were like immigrant parents, so they really were expecting me to go to like
Mm,
U of T or something and pursue a normal
exactly.
career. They weren't too on board with the idea of like art as a career. But I do have to thank Domi Shi for like changing that narrative because once Domi Shi came out and it was like, oh, she's from Sheridan and now she's at Pixar directing, my parents were like a little bit more on board. Oh, sorry, or a little bit more on board with the idea. um, but yeah, like after I discovered that as a career path, that's when I really started taking like art outside of school. So before that, I'd never taken any like formal art education. So after that, that's when I started doing like figure drawing and then also like still life, like fine art, like the fundamentals training. But then also I went to a portfolio prep place where they solely focused on Sheridan animation. Um, and then after many months of working hard on portfolio, I managed to get in. So I'm very glad with that, or
You
else I
got
wouldn't
it
be
on your
here.
first try. That is amazing. No, really, because like I said, I went to art school. However, I went to art school focusing on concept art for video games, and I've watched a lot of videos about like because my school is more niche, or the school I graduated from was more niche, so there weren't a lot of like portfolio videos. So when I was prepping my portfolio, even though like Sheridan isn't necessarily concept art, nor is it like the school or in Montreal, but I still watched a lot of those videos because they tend to be like, you know, a lot of like my accepted Sheridan portfolio videos or my rejected Sheridan portfolio videos. And I would hear people say, this is my third attempt, this is my fifth attempt. And I'm like, wow. So like it's really impressive that you got in on your first attempt. So yeah, props to you.
Thank you, thank you. I think like to that I'll say like I think the portfolio, like the admission portfolio process has gotten so incredibly competitive. I think I got really lucky that I got in like at a time where there was just like starting to have like a few like portfolio videos online. And I think like if I had applied with my current portfolio, I probably wouldn't get it.
I
So I
don't think
think the
so
times
though.
are definitely
But
changing.
yeah, I do agree. It's getting more and more competitive because I'm like with all the resources out there for like beginner artists now, it's like someone can go from absolute like new artist with no idea of like whatever fundamentals are to like like a professional in like just a year. It's crazy like the progress that happens now with all the resources out there. Um you spoke a bit about your inspirations. You said you watch a lot of anime and fan art. I know a lot of people listening to this can relate to this. I know I relate to drawing a lot of fan art myself. But can you share more about your inspirations and specifically how you were able to channel them into your art?
Yeah, of course. So obviously, like a lot of anime. I think in the early days, just watching a lot of anime and just drawing a lot of fan art. I don't really remember which animes exactly from because it was so long
Yeah,
ago, but there was a lot of fan art.
a lot.
Yeah. I also did, or a lot of my inspiration does come from like figure drawing or life drawing, like observing people, but also for my characters, like I like to base them off of like people I know. It just feels a little bit more authentic. And it kind of calms down the imposter syndrome a little bit, you know? Like, you can't blame me. I'm basing this off of someone real and then someone that I know. And then I also like looking at musicals for inspiration for like stories and characters. Um, and just any other forms of like media that I enjoy. That's kind of like that I'm passionate about that I can kind of like work on for a long time. And certain artists that I really like that have inspired me are like Ami Thompson, Sheehan Kim, Brittany Myers, Dean Heason, Kenna Jean Harris, Nico Marley, James Woods, Christina Zhang. And then so that's for like animation specifically. And I also, but more recently, I've been looking more into like games because I started playing League of Legends after graduating. So a lot of like, so that opened up like a new part of the industry to me, and I've been really inspired by the works of like Night Zhang, Ian Su, TB Choi, and also uh, some certain like anime artists like Yone Yamamai. Love her work so much. And then also like shows and other media like Arcane, of course, and Spider Verse, and like just so many films out there where I've just like seeing the behind the scenes of the like the art of books. That's super inspiring, and I try to convey that sort of like fun and playfulness into and freedom into my work as well, especially into my life drawings. If not, because I don't design characters on a daily basis anymore, but whenever I do try to do life drawing, I try to convey that sort of like whether it's a technical skill like the line quality or maybe the forms, or just like the fun and the exploration and the like looseness of like exploring with multiple mediums. Such as like in some of the arcane behind the scenes, that very like graphic like grungy look, and then also even some of the behind the scenes of like the character designs behind Puss in Boots. Like some of those were really like inspirational, and the way they just like the boldness of their lines. So yeah, that's how I find inspiration and how I fuse it into my work.
You know what's very interesting? I love asking artists their inspirations because I like being able to be like, oh, I see that. I see how she incorporates that into her work. And everything you mentioned, I kind of see that, like how you brought all the elements from the colors to the stylistic choices to the bold mark makings, and you kind of just like put it all together in one big pot and made it yours. And I absolutely love that because, like you mentioned, the bold marks, the color, the vibrancy, the stylization, the flow, everything you said, all that screams Jennifer to me. Like I'm looking at your portfolio and I'm just like, yep, yep, I see that. I see the Spider Verse. I see the arcade. I kind of see like all the loose mark makings, the colors and everything. It's absolutely stunning. I absolutely love it. So yeah, I definitely see that. Thank you so much for sharing some of your inspiration. So I want to talk a bit more about your process because, whew, your art. You have a lot of like, I wouldn't say it's varying style obviously because they all still feel cohesive, but as a visual development artist, I'm sure you challenge yourself to work in various type of like styles so that you can show your adaptability into various projects, I assume. And I kind of see that reflects in your portfolio. I can see you working on more like feature stuff and also a bit more stylized stuff and even more very cartoony stuff. I see all that in your work, of course. I want to know about your process. I Is it like a straightforward process for all these? Like, do you have the same type of like, or maybe some styles follow a different workflow? I'm very curious to know your thought process when you work because I am, once again, I'm just looking at your work and I'm like, my brain doesn't think like this. I really wish my brain could think in such a stylized way, but I tend to be a bit more restricted. I'm trying to practice and be a bit more expressive, but my brain is so restricted and I just want to know how you think when you work. So yeah, please tell us a bit about your creative process.
Yeah, of course. So I guess for like the pieces in my portfolio, it definitely varies. Like some of my Toronto pieces are kind of just based off like everyday life and trying to capture moments. So that's kind of like how I go about like my paintings. Like the goal is just always to try to capture a moment. But for characters and stories, um, I typically try to write out the like story or like key points, and always I try to write down like what's the character's goal and motivation, and what's their like personality in a few words, and then their like conflict type, like is it external or internal, and like what is the conflict specifically, because I think in the process of like developing a character you can kind of easily get lost in like all the little like Easter eggs you want to put in there or all the little quirks you want them to have, but then it makes the character kind of hard to even like relate to, and the story kind of gets like all muddy when the characters don't have like a very obvious goal and like simple motivation. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I always try to like start that first and have it on the side every time I'm designing a new character. And I also try to explore in like loose observational ways. So whether that be like drawing faces on Pinterest or even going in real life, like studying people from life, going to life drawing, and then like maybe even finding like a story within the life drawing. And that's why I think like even though I do have like a character section on my portfolio, I think maybe one of my stronger pages on my portfolio for character is my life drawing um, page, just because like in life drawing, it's just so especially in costume life drawing, it's so inspiring to see like what the models do and the stories they come up with and how you can kind of manipulate that and like evolve that as an artist and like really find the character and like the voice of the character that you're drawing. So I think that's why like I feel a bit better about my life drawing page more than my actual character page. Um, but yeah, I just love that like exploratory like stage where you can kind of use any medium and explore in like all sorts of ways. And I'm really inspired by like all these like artists who sometimes use collage to like explore and find shapes and textures to their characters. Just very free and playful, very reminiscent of how we or what we were drawn to as kids, like why we wanted to draw. And then I'll even listen to music to really like get into the mood, especially if it's a musical. I'll just listen to the musical over and over again, and kind of imagine them acting in my mind. And then also like this exploration, I can even be exploring like their acting, their interactions with other characters, like just sketches. Um, And then I think from that point on, if there's a specific drawing that I really like, I'll just put it to the side and then I will kind of develop that even more, like do more iterations. And then obviously get feedback from other people. I'll like send it to all my friends. I'll be like, "Help me! I'm indecisive." and then, so after like many rounds of like indecisiveness, I'll finally be convinced to pick something, and then I will uh, just develop it more, like whether it's like rotations or like expression sheets or like making like a final like posed drawing that's like rendered maybe. But yeah, so that's kind of like the process that I go through for characters, and it definitely changes and it fluctuates. But I think generally that is the beginning, especially that is kind of the mindset I go approach. I want to have when I approach like character design for it doesn't matter which style. But yeah, that yeah.
That is so interesting to me. First of all, I can highly relate to being indecisive when working on character design. And so, yeah, thank you so, so much for sharing. I absolutely love that. I learned something today. Okay, so now we can finally talk a bit about the book. Specifically to the book, can you tell us about um, your contribution to the recent character design quarterly magazine?
So essentially, it was a behind the scenes of my thesis film, Mission Popo, and it was the like my fourth year film for Sheridan, and I made a short, I think 3 minute action short film, in like a sort of anime-ish style. And in that, I talk about like characters specifically and making a character for a short film. Um, and I spent around 8 months making the film from like ideation to finish. And I'd say the character design process maybe took like 3 to 4 months to like bring it from like ideation to like the final, like we're not touching this anymore. This is the design. And so I talk about like my inspiration for the film, but also like for this character and how I find like unique things from penguins to incorporate to my grandma and to kind of come up with this like unique character. And this way all my decision making is based on like nature, who has it like all figured out. So I talk about more about that, and I think I also talk about like the exploration, obviously, like the references I tried to gather, and what sort of exploration I did, and how many rounds of exploration I did. But then also finally, like I talk about production, and I feel like that's something that's not talked about as much. Because the exploration is like the fun part, the fun whimsical part that you can that everyone has like a kind of unique take to. But then for production, especially for a production where I was going to have to animate this character by myself for many many months, there's a lot of different considerations that went into like the final design of this character, because it couldn't just be whatever I wanted. It had to be feasible, and I wanted to finish my film on time. So it talks about like the considerations of like a self-made short film, and then like the design sacrifices or any problems I had to solve for the sake of like finishing the film, but also like the clarity of the film, like how often does the character even appear in this pose versus another pose, and like how the clothing affects the silhouette, and how to bring it into a film from like from the or like how to test it in the film, and how to like make sure it's actually yeah, functioning in the film and it meets its purpose, and all that sort of stuff.
I actually, you know what? I think that's very, very important to mention because I think that a lot of, especially like new artists who maybe are not really familiar with the production phase, because especially what you see online, it's kind of like the fancy finished stuff, like the cool stuff, you know. But in reality, what goes on behind the scenes is like not so cool, right? And there's a lot of, I guess, sacrifices and things that have to be broken and taken apart to make it work. I think it's very important to like mention that and remind people that about these restrictions and the importance of all of that. So yeah, before we end the interview, I just wanted to ask real quick, what advice do you have for beginner artists, aspiring artists, maybe artists who want to work in animation, visual development, or artists who are just maybe, just want to improve their skills? What advice would you have for them?
That is a good question. um, I think something I struggled a lot with, like even after getting into Sheridan, was like trying to like fit a mold in order to like get hired. So my style was used to be very like Disney Pixar esque, and I tried to get really good at that. But then because the shifts in the industry, I kind of like returned to my roots for my thesis and made like a more anime style, similar to like something I would draw in high school probably, but hopefully a bit more elevated now. So I think one tip I have is like the industry is always evolving. So never try too hard to like necessarily fit into a specific mold. While it is good to like get out of your comfort zone and explore, I would say don't necessarily do it only for the purpose of like I want to get hired. Um, and I think instead of like pursuing like after like studying or drawing like a certain artist for their resume, instead try to pursue like studying their work and trying to problem solve and reverse engineer, something that you like about their art, because there's something unique and intriguing about it that you find interesting. And so like never give up on learning and being curious, because I think like your passion and your curiosity is one of the greatest tools that you can have as an artist. And the longer you can like hold on to it, it will like propel your work, and you can keep going, because it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And after all, like we draw because it's fun, right? And I think in this like difficult time in the industry, like I have a lot of friends who are like taking on like other jobs in the industry, while they haven't necessarily given up on art, but they just in this time they have to like pursue something different, just to have like stability. But I think something you can still hold on to, that all the terrible things in the world they can't take away, is like your passion for learning and growing, and like your curiosity. So as long as you can kind of stay curious about art and like just keep making art, that makes you happy and that makes you feel like that you're learning something and growing. That's kind of all that matters, I guess. Like even in my periods of unemployment, I think like I really there are days where I wish I had that passion and curiosity. So if I were to tell myself like a few years back, is not to like burn myself out and just really like hold on to that bit of curiosity and passion, because that really does help you get through like the difficult times. Yeah.
Thank you so so much. Absolutely beautiful advice. I totally agree with you. I think it's important, especially like you said, right now, the most important thing that you have for yourself is your passion, that fire, that flame. So yeah, thank you so much. Beautiful.